Michael, congratulations on another successful lecture at Devises this year. I was a little surprised. You usually just focus in on geometric details and interesting facts that you've discovered and teased out of formations, but this year you went into some personal areas and some of your own experiences and actually called the lecture Astonishments. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you decided to go down that road?
Um, I, I felt really that I'd been skirting this for many years. I'd been avoiding the, I suppose, what you could call the numinous, unknown, and bewildering nature of this phenomenon, which offers us all the time coincidences, synchronicities, oddities, strangenesses. And so I just thought I would try and pull some of these out and recount them. A further astonishment, which I didn't mention, was just how many there are. We learn to encompass everything in the conventional worldview, and staring at this landscape of normal oddness, regular strangeness, I was further astonished by how much there is and how consistently it is part of this environment now.
Before you went into the sort of personal astonishments, you started with the astonishment that is John Martino.
Well, we owe a breathtaking amount of we owe gratitude to John Martino for that initial discovery of the absolute structural necessity of the geometry, the hidden geometry, the invisible geometry, which lies at a level underneath the formations. And it was John Martino's achievement to recognize that there was behind the event, underlying the event, a series of constraints, hidden constraints, a hidden skeleton, a hidden code, which enlightened us about the order of this. Now, if I can go into this in some detail, if you place a pentagram is a 5-pointed star. A pentagon is a 5-surfaced shape, 5-sided shape. We're talking here about pentagram, the 5-sided star. Now, what you will notice is that the pentagram has several crucial points. One of the crucial points is the arm crossing point. What he achieved with this pair of images was the dynamo for all crop circle geometry and geometric research that has gone since then. These two drawings are an astonishment. This is not astonishment number 1. This is astonishment 0. This is the pre-astonishment. But what he discovered is that if he overlaid onto this diagram, and this diagram had been produced by, in the early 90s, a guy called John Langrish, he was a design and technology teacher who did a series of absolutely millimeter accurate ground surveys. And it was, we all did ground surveys, but John Langrish was the master. He has since left, unfortunately. He was wonderful. But John Martino worked on John Langrish's surveys and had this remarkable intuition, this idea to lay a geometrical form over the crop circle to discover the order within it. And I suppose there is no way of understanding this without the first leap of intuition. And for 20 odd years, I've tried to find out from John what caused him to understand that. To have the intuition that it might be there and to discover it on the board, on the drawing board. He's never satisfactorily been able to explain it. When I've suggested to him that it was perhaps some sort of triggering idea from elsewhere, he won't have that. And indeed, who can say what is and what is not a triggering idea from elsewhere? It could all be a triggering idea from elsewhere, or none of it could be. I mean, who knows?
But sometimes if you speak to an author or somebody who's come up with something new, they can usually give you a sequence of events, sometimes coincidental and synchronistic, that led them to it. But John wasn't able to say that there was any single thing that made him look in that direction.
No, he did say that he had been working on a famous couple of pages of the ratios and proportions set out by different geometries, different configurations, which are based always on the idea that the containing circle of the geometry is 1, and that which is contained by the geometry is 0 point whatever. So, for example, to make it very simple, Euclid's second theorem states that if you put an equilateral triangle inside a circle, the circle being diameter 1, and then you put a circle inside the triangle, a contained circle, the diameter of that contained circle is 0.5, half. The relationship is 1 to 2. Now, John produced an astonishing work, which was an examination of all the geometric relationships. I think it's a 4-page chart. And he said that this preceded his intuition. This work preceded his intuition about the crop circles. And he applied it to the crop circles and it clicked into place. And what he discovered was breathtaking. He found that if you took the simple step of sizing the pentagram so that the arms would cross on the major circle, that one and that one. If you simply size that up, it would produce a series of synchronous events which were beyond accidental, beyond coincidental. They were clearly willful. They were clearly deliberate. This was designed. There was an active intelligence behind this. What he discovered was that, can you see the circle enclosing a full pentagram? Locating the arm crossings, you establish the larger containing circle. And what do you find? You find two miraculous things. That, first of all, these little dots, which were regarded as accidental grape shot on the field, were bing on the point and the big circle, and bing on the point and the big circle. This isn't random. It's an astonishing synchronicity. But further, he discovered that having done that, if you run the line from that point of the pentagram through, it hits that point and thus gives you the length of the formation. Now, maybe, for me, this is magic. This is thrilling. This is like assembling a finely made antique Swiss watch and seeing the way the bits go click, click, click with beauty. The crop circles were regarded then by many, and are regarded now by many, as some kind of random accident, as simply at one level. There are a lot of bone-brained human beings who think that this is possible by the action of dysfunctional sociopaths in black t-shirts at night. And we're seeing here I speak as a recovering architect. I speak as a designer. I speak as a guy who was once a professor of architecture. This is brilliance. This is a brilliance of intent and order, and it doesn't happen by accident. And this was John's achievement.
What do you think is the reasoning in the mind behind putting a design in a field that hides most of the important stuff? Why would somebody or something seek to do that?
To stretch us. It is a curriculum. We are being taught stuff. I mean, I was an architect. I was a professor of architecture in California. In both of these situations, the student and the teacher, I never came across the wisdom and understanding that the circles have brought me. This has been yet another astonishment.
And you say there's a syllabus and it's to stretch us so that we learn about something. What would you say that the title of the class is? What's the subject? Because if we talk about geometry or proportions, a lot of people don't see the deep profundity that's contained within these ratios and proportions.
I would struggle to put a title on such a wide and comprehensive course. But if there is anything underlying it, I would say they're telling us to open our eyes, and also, as a corollary, open our hearts.
The first astonishment you mentioned was the Bythorn mandala.
Which I suppose, looking back on nearly, Bythorn was 20 years ago, and 20 years from now actually. And thinking back over approaching quarter of a century, I have to say that the Bythorn experience for me was crucial and central, and I learnt there things which stay with me and are active and pertinent to this day. Now, this is Astonishment 1. We're now onto the countdown. Astonishment number 1, which was referred to yesterday by Elizabeth, was the Bythorn mandala of September 93. 93 was a bitch of a year, rather similar to 2003. 13, are we already there? And we had a very poor season. And this formation arrived miraculously, very late in the calendar, and very up in Cambridgeshire, rather distant from the normal territory. And I was very lucky. I'm always lucky. I'm very grateful for my good fortune always. But I visited this 3 times. And I think I know more about this formation than any other earthling. I measured it. In fact, I measured it with John Martino. And I studied it. I remain transfixed by this. People say to me, what is your favorite formation? And that is like saying, which of your children would you first throw out of the lifeboat? I have 100 favorite formations. I have 200 favorite formations. No, I have 300 favorite formations. We can go on all day, but this is one of them, and it was magical. One of the magic things about it was that it arrived, it was formed, it was manifested. It was the first pentagram that was actually pressed into wheat a couple of years after John's astonishing intuition about the hidden pentagram. This was like getting a pat on the back from teacher. I was very moved by this. John, being a modest guy, sort of shrugged his shoulders. But there's too much to talk about, really, but it was an amazing and absolutely transformative formation. Next slide. One of the things it did which historically is very important, is that prior to Bythorne, we had wheat in two conditions: standing up and laid down. And Bythorne suddenly demonstrated something else. Standing up wheat, laid down wheat, but overlaid wheat. And that overlay was in a path exactly 40 inches wide. Could you go back one? And that path went like this, around a petal, bounced around a petal, down, and it was always 40 inches wide. It was always in a clockwise direction, and those of you who have been paying attention will see that it formed 5 hearts. Now, the other interesting thing about this pentagram, the Star of Life, was that it pointed south. It was an upside down pentagram. It didn't point approximately south or nearly south. It pointed exactly magnetic south. It was upside down. It was telling us, perhaps, that we were upside down, which was true. We were. We still are. But this was a symbolic statement to us that our Star of Life, when finally we got it, though it had been intuited, when finally they imprinted it on the earth, was the wrong way round. Now, the other astonishment, which for me, having spent my life making things and putting things together, the other astonishment was this. And this is a sub-astonishment of astonishment 1. That obviously there where the star point goes, you will notice on that petal a very precise chamfer. And it was a chamfer to produce a 36-degree shave off the edge of the petal. And that occurs at all the points of the star. But where the star did not exist, there, and there was a very exact 36-degree chamfer. Now, those of you who make things, those of you who have assembled for their kid a model aeroplane, those of you who have been through the heartbreak of assembling an IKEA flat-pack wardrobe, will know that you do not search for irrelevant operations. You do that which is required, full stop. You employ a carpenter, you do not find him hanging around the house doing irrelevant jobs. He does it and he goes away. But here, the girls, the management, the authorities, the Federation provided a 36-degree chamfer at these empty spaces. Why were they doing that? Why did they take that effort? I mean, clearly, the ones near the petals were done as part of this very, very long 40-inch sweep. But why was it extended to provide these accurate 36-degree slots? Next slide. This shows the beauty of the way that is overlaid by this one. I mean, it was a beautiful overlay pattern, the like of which I've never seen before. Next slide. And here is why the chamfers were provided in the empty slots, because it provided the housing for the correctly pointing star. That very simply, there were 5 very precise slots saying, if you want to put your pentagram of life, your star of life, the right way up, you just have to rotate it a bit, like the knob on an old radio, to position and to correct your star. Bythorn was a wonderful formation, but Bythorn had layers of meaning and understanding in the hard world, in the reality. It had layers of brilliance in the design and the making and the manufacture and the layout and the way the wheat was handled. It was, at its time, revolutionary, evolutionary. It was the first realized pentagram, which was ironic in that 2 or 3 years previously, John Martino had recognized the importance of the pentagram, the 5-pointed star, as a hidden constraint. And so getting a realized pentagram in the field was, as I've often said, like getting a pat on the head from teacher. There was number one. There was also the sophistication of the lay, the like of which we'd never quite seen before. Then, to me, and I hate here to open the claggy gutters of sewage which surrounds this subject. It was also for me a confrontation with the lies of the hoaxers and Astonishment, but with the readiness with which these lies are accepted and embraced with happiness by senior researchers, the Council of the Centre for Cropsical Studies. This has stayed with me for 20 years as a kick in the head, really. It broke my heart. Now, I'm going very briefly to enter a contentious area, and I don't like doing this, I'll keep it brief. Elizabeth talked yesterday about how, go back, about how this miracle was claimed by an unappetizing teenager called Julian Richardson. And the Centre for Crop Circle Studies, now extinct organization set up an inquiry to investigate his entirely spurious false claims. And I went along to this, having already worked on this miraculous formation for weeks. And I was sitting alone in one of the rooms of the house where we held the meeting, and somebody came in and said to me, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know who he was. And he said, and these words are engraved on my mind. He said, hello, Michael, I am the perpetrator. Now, this was in the days before crime scene investigator, where perps and Vics are commonplace. If he was the perpetrator, we obviously were the Vic. And he claimed that he made this. And it was a breathtaking lie. But Astonishment 1A for me was the ease with which these falsehoods were accepted and embraced by the examining committee of the now thankfully extinct Centre for Crop Circle Studies, of which I was then, to my shame, a member of the committee. They loved this kid. And they believed what he said. And this was a moment of revelation for me, which has stayed to this moment, because it illuminated for me humanity's need to deny, humanity's need to go to bed at night and go to sleep without those pesky foreign ideas, UFOs, ghosts, love, crop circles. Don't let them intrude. Let me just think about my mortgage and my motor car.
You drove away from that meeting in a state of shock.
Yeah.
That they'd accepted the word of a man who had to be helped with what radius meant when he was explaining how he made this formation.
First of all, I was lucky enough to visit Bythorn 3 times. Brand new, in the middle, battered down. I met the farmer, spent some time with him in the field. I measured it with John Martino. And I'd spent weeks after that doing research on it, so that by the time this absurd meeting came to assess the veracity of this pathetic hoax claimant, I was more familiar with the Bythorn formation than with any other formation I've seen since. And I would venture to say I was more familiar with that formation than anybody. And that this unprepossessing teenager could come forward and claim to be its author was an absurdity. And I couldn't believe that rational adult humans could believe this. So I went away in a state of some shock and disbelief.
We've seen these absurdities happen many times throughout where if it was a court trial, an expert witness of design and building and construction would be called and then completely ignored in favour of somebody who doesn't know basic geometry and basic
who doesn't know diddly squat.
Exactly. So we've seen this, and that in itself is a massive lesson in humanity. It has been.
Yeah, it's served me well. To be immersed in this level of mendacity so early. I was acquainted from the start with just how ruthless their lies are.
After the Bythorn mandala, Michael, there was another pentagram at Bishop's Canning, and in that you had a deeply personal experience, which you told me privately in the past, but I was surprised that you decided to go public with it. What led you to do that?
Well, I just figured it was about time I went public. It was about time I put cards on the table, really. I mean, I've always had a sense of responsibility with my lectures and writing. I've always thought that I should tell the truth, or as the New Age says, my truth. And I was always slightly concerned about presenting that which was, I don't want to say scientific, but that which could edge into the existing worldview, if you like. And most of these astonishments could be called impossibilities. But then I thought, well, what am I going to do with this? You know, the truth is, although, as you see, I look 23, I'm really 184. And I felt that it's about time I unzipped this stuff and presented it. And people can take it or leave it. You know, I don't tell lies. I don't invent stuff. This really happened to me, and it might have been a moment of madness and folly, but I believe now when was it? 97, 16 years later, I believe it happened. And I believe also it's my responsibility to put this on the table for people to use their own discernment. I was working at this stage with Patricia Murray from California. We went to this crop circle. She was very fit, sprightly, active, small woman. And I, by this stage, was walking on one stick, or for Americans, just to prove that I can speak your language, one cane. And we were thrilled with this because it was another pentagram. It was the second pentagram, the second manifest pentagram. There were to be many more through the years, but this was the second. And we were very anxious to see it. We parked our car and she walked quickly in. 97 was a point when I realised that I was not going to win the men's singles at Wimbledon. And I found it very hard to move around. And she'd gone ahead and she was taking photographs and measurements and things. I had to labour into the field and I went straight to the centre. I was exhausted. I went straight to the centre and I laid down. And astonishment too. Something extraordinary happened to me. I've never been, I don't think I've been psychic or clairvoyant or clairaudient. I always wanted to be able to levitate, but I couldn't do it. So I can't even douse. That's how bad I am at that stuff. I've always worked through my eyes, and that made me quite happy, really. But I lay down, I lay down in the center of the circle, and I had a conversation. Now, I did not speak, nor did I hear words, but I formed a question very clearly, which is not a thing I've done before or since very often. And I heard, no, I didn't hear a reply. I knew a reply. I lay down in the center of the formation and I formed the question, are you here? And they responded, we are always here. We are always everywhere. This wasn't heard, but it was so clear to me. I was shaken by this. So I then said, I was feeling wretched. I was feeling weak, tired, and depressed. I couldn't get into crop circles anymore. It was getting harder. I then said, will you help me? And they said, no space of time. They responded, we will help you to help you. I then said, thank you. I need guidance. And they said, we will not let you fall. And that was the sixth element conversation. How long ago was 1997? 16 years ago. That conversation has been at the forefront of my head ever since. That was so clear. That was an epiphany for me. I've not had that sort of exchange, as I say. I've never had anything before or since, but it's all over my computer screen, different programs. It keeps coming up on the bottom, reminding me of this exchange, because They haven't let me fall. They've nearly let me fall, but they haven't let me fall. And I'm very grateful for that.
As you say, people have approached the formations and tried to research them in a scientific or so-called scientific way, which will fit in with the current paradigm of thinking. And as soon as you step out of that, like quite often people, are channeling something and get a message from the watchers or the this, that, or the others, and obviously then you're never going to bring the scientific community along with your thoughts. So what did you hope to gain in terms of the public's perception and credibility of the crop circles by telling this story?
I didn't think I would gain anything, really. I thought it was a risk. I thought that for those who were predisposed to believe I was an aging lunatic, this would confirm it. I thought that those who knew me to be a straight person, that they might find this small story of some interest. That's all. I don't believe the existing worldview, which is fundamentally Newtonian, science and evidence based. I don't believe it will be shifted. I believe it's like the Rock of Gibraltar. There will come a moment when one day the Rockies will crumble, Gibraltar will tumble. It'll shift, but it's not yet. And one has to act under the shadow of this mountain of certainties.
And for those of us that have been around the formations for a number of years, there are many of us that have had experiences which we know can't be explained by the current paradigm, and we also know that if we go off and report them to other people, our sanity is going to be questioned.
Yes.
But for those of us that respect our work and respect us as not being somebody that should be committed to a loony bin, when you tell them we've had an experience like this, quite often they'll tell you an experience that they've had, and then it turns out that there's not very many people that haven't had experiences.
Absolutely.
Which can't be explained, but nevertheless they're deep and they're personal.
And for all of them, they are aware that they're living in a hostile environment. It's very much as though we are in a territory which is under occupation, and we're worried about declaring ourselves, but we do it in enclosed rooms filled with other dissidents. But I mean, I've had people, old friends, literally stand up and run away. Literally run away.
It's a surprise that the occupied territory that you speak of is the occupation of people who want the world to remain flat, and as soon as anything's presented to them that says it may be
And I mean, bless them. I can understand. You think about a wild creature in the jungle. His first urge is one of survival. And what does he need for survival? He needs today to be the same as yesterday. And he hopes that tomorrow will be the same as today. Because with that in place, he can get food for his kids. He can survive. And what the crop circles are saying to us is that it's going to change. It's already started. It's already shifting.
Ironic that the crop circles would be made in the very stuff that we eat, the bread of life.
So that's where I live. There was my Hampton star. This was the house where where Francine Blake used to live in Hampton, where Patricia and I rented the annex. I think we're now in 1997. We were renting the annex, and one night there, Patricia had bought a new camera, and it was night time, and she was testing the camera out, and she interviewed me. It was a long interview. And I said, should I interview you? And we then tested the camera. And at the end, I said, are you finished? Is that all you've got to say? And she said, and I'll read this. She said, I would like to add that I want to see a luminosity. I really want to see a luminosity. I really want to see a luminosity or multiple luminosities. Now, I must intercede here and say that this was the year after the 1996 Oliver's Castle event, where two groups of luminosities were filmed forming a star, which Patricia and I got very involved in, and we'd never seen it, so we were very thrilled by this. I really want to see a luminosity. I really want to see a luminosity or multiple luminosities. Yeah, and at Oliver's Castle, because it's such a good place to see them. That's where I want to see it. Where are we now? We are exactly on July 22nd, 1997. I hope this is as good as an announcement at the barge. Michael, Glickman and Patricia want to see a luminosity. Okay, you understand, guys and girls up there? Okay, good. And that's all I have to say. July 22nd. On July the 23rd. Now, I must say that we never discovered this until we went back to America, and I catalogued all the tapes, and we never remembered her request. But on July the 23rd, we were driving back from Marlborough along here, and a luminosity dropped in front of the car. 24 hours later, a luminosity dropped in front of the car and sped off in this direction.
You then talked about an experience with Patricia Murray,
Yeah.
and the Hampton formation.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the astonishments. Tell me what, you've been through these experiences. What?
The first thing, I mean, it's in the lectures, so I won't go through it again, but very simply, the coincidence of her stating a wish. I want to see a formation, I want to see a luminosity. And it came the next day, within 24 hours. Now, this at least is surprising. And it's very easy to say, oh, coincidence. But then this particular luminosity dropped in front of us and sped off towards the long Edgwell-Hampton field at Gypsy Patch, which Patricia and I had been closely associated with, made it richer. So we came in from Devizes, turned the corner to mine. On that part of the road, I said to her, it's arrived. And again, this is something I've never done. I've never done before or since. I said, it's there. Now, she's a tough little broad, isn't she? And she said, what do you mean it's arrived? I said, it's there. And it was dark, and we'd been around long enough to know you don't go looking in the dark into fields. And she said, okay, what's it like? And I said, it's got 3 circles. And she said, all right. We went back to sleep in Francine Blake's annex. And the next morning, when we got up, I phoned Steve. And I said, Steve, have you been to photograph the formation in Edgwell-Hampton? Patricia was furious. She said, you can't get him to do that. We don't know that it's there. And I said, it's there. I knew it was there. Next slide. We went there in the morning. That was there. This pair of formations was another one which became central to my work. And we walked in, and I said, well, there you are. And she said, 2 circles. And I thought, oh God, who do you complain to? But here is the extraordinary part. I did an enormous amount of work on this, which was a gridded formation and which I later showed to be referring to 2012. It was a calendar grid. And we spent a lot of time there. This was our headquarters. We used to come in down that path and down that tram line. That was our headquarters. And we would photograph, we would measure. We spent days there until it was harvested. And we sat there, and the combine was shaving the field away like a piece of bacon, cutting. And something, again, miraculous happened, because the combine harvester is worth a lot of money, and they don't mess about. And something happened which has never happened to me before or since. The combine harvester driver stopped there. He stopped the machine, switched it off, opened the window, and we went over, and he said to us these words, which again are engraved on my consciousness. He said, have you seen the 3rd circle? No. Oh, God. And then there was this event of me coming around the corner of the monument and saying to her in the dark, the formations arrived. And knowing that there were 3 elements which upset Patricia because she, like me, was very nervous about becoming woo-woo, you know. Oh, I knew it was there, you know. I mean, it made me very nervous. Nothing like this had happened before or since, and I was rather surprised. And then, as I disclosed later, there were only two elements which I was disappointed by, but the farm worker told us that there was a third, which what you, yeah, well, as Tony Soprano would say, what are you gonna do?
But the subject of coincidences is, for me, the biggest personal experiences that I've had around the crop circles have been the most astounding coincidences which defy all explanation and are simply dismissed by most people as merely coincidences. But they point towards something, all these coincidences.
But you see, here is the thing. This kind of coincidence, synchronicity, has been part of the structure of human life around the world through the ages. And scientism, the most pervasive religious fundamentalism we've ever known, has shifted our society into eliminating this. We don't worship anymore. We're not in awe of nature and the world anymore. Everything can be explained.
And not only explained, it has to be explained in its complete singularity. You have to get rid of all external factors, even us looking at it, to try and determine whether or not this is a factor. But anything that happens in simultaneity, anything that happens connected together with this, and this, is just nothing. It's just regardless.
If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And so I do not believe that there is a shift and that synchronicities and coincidences and strangenesses are surging back. I believe simply that the curtain imposed on us by the scientific worldview is slowly being opened up to allow us to return to what I believe is a pre-existing natural state of humanity, within which not only do coincidences and oddities and inexplicabilities occur, but we accept them now. They're part of the substance of daily life. This photograph was taken by Patricia. It is, you're familiar with this, Silbury Koch fractal. But what was astonishing about this is that there are two circumstances which are regular. Circumstance one, people fly over formations to take photographs. Circumstance two, people form circles in formations. But the conjunction of these two circumstances is rare. To actually photograph a circular group in a formation is a very nice synchronicity of events. And we were very pleased with this. And in California, we had it blown up and it was on the wall. And Patricia is a horsewoman, and used to get horsey magazines. And this intrigued me because there used to be adverts for corrals that you could assemble by linking components of fences. And they were never circular. And I thought, how could this be? You get an advertising agency to set up your product, and you can't make a circle. And then I took this further, and I looked at pictures of kids holding hands. They're always egg-shaped. They're always oval. And human beings do not make circles. They make approximations of circles. But my old geometric brain was very intrigued by this. And I was very intrigued by the fact that appeared to be geometrically circular. But I just lived with it. It was on the wall of our living room office. Then one day, there was a group in California, a sort of healing group, a Brazilian healing group, where we all, I mean, you know, I've always verged on the New Age crystal fairy bliss bunny persuasion. And so I went along to this group, and we all had to wear white, and one by one we were healed lying down, very pleasant, and they played ethereal music in the manner of these events. On this occasion, I was lying down, being ministered to by the appropriate priestess or goddess or whatever, and I had this very clear message which said, look at the geometry of that photograph. It was an instruction, a commandment. I went home and I started simply looking at that circle. And I blew it up and examined it. It was geometrically more circular than I could imagine. And I thought, that's surprising. It also had 22 people in it. 22 is the second number of the master number series. Next slide. That circle sits precisely against the two lines dividing the formation into two. I mean, look at that. How did that group of 22 know to sit with such precision at the precise center point of the formation? Is it me, or is that a little bit good? Next slide, please. And the size of the circle, the diameter of the circle, was precisely the same size as the third iteration triangle of the Koch sequence. If that big triangle is first iteration, and that triangle is second iteration, these triangles are the third. And so the size of the third triangle is exactly the same size as the radius. Oh, it's just coincidence. I think part of John Martino's early work showed that the formations did not. I suppose we think about targets and bullseyes and things aligning with the center of things. And John Martino's work showed that as well as the line aiming for the center, the line aiming to tangent the circle was very important. And a lot of his early work was to do with the alignment of tangents. Now, I think that the tangent here was very important because this circle of people, this remarkably circular circle of people, had not placed itself over the center of the formation, but it had placed itself within the corner of the two axes. So it was tangented there by this one, it was tangented by there by the other one, and the circle nested with centimeter precision into the crossing of these two lines. And this, I could not believe this. But further, that there were 22 people in the circle, an important number, and the diameter of the circle was exactly the same as the size of the third iteration triangle of the fractal. Now, this indicates to me indubitably intent, will, the intention of the authors of that event was to draw something to our attention. And I have repeatedly stated in writing and in lectures, I would like to know who they were.
Never come back.
I was writing for SC magazine, and I forget what year this was, 98, and I said impulsively, next year we will see the geometry of 4. Next year we'll see squares, which is a stupid thing to do. I mean, predictions, prophecy, don't want to do that, but I did it. When I was met at Heathrow Airport by my youngest son, who is now a film cameraman, but he was always hawk-eyed. His older brothers always used him as a spotter in rock pools on the beach. He was always able to see better than his brothers. He always, I remember once driving to Glastonbury, as he drove, he spotted the formation. And as he drove me in from Heathrow to a rented place at Stanton, St. Bernard, he spotted this in Ditton. And this was in a field which had never before been visited. It was the field nearest to the house I was renting, and part of the formation was quintuple Celtic cross, which obviously is part of fullness and squareness. On, I think, 23rd July, was it? I've just noticed, I have literally just now noticed that we're dealing again with the 23rd of July. I'd never noticed this before. But this formation arrived on the 23rd of July. I arrived on the 23rd of July. I then noticed, obviously, this contains squareness. I thought, oh, that's good. Two other formations next arrived on the 23rd of July. And they said, and it was a cube. And they said, hey, you want square? We'll show you square. We'll show you how to play with square. This arrived on the same day. Next slide. Now, this arrived again on the 23rd of July. You wouldn't know this has anything to do with square, but for a geometer, this is, next slide. If you fold this up, this becomes an octahedron, which is the sibling of the cube. So they were saying, we'll show you a square. And they played with square. Next slide. Here we are. So they really, in response to my request, I mean, this is so interactive. And I tell you these stories not because I wish to put myself forward as some kind of special receiver. We are all special receivers. They react to us. They respond not only precisely and brilliantly, but very accurately as to time, and beyond that which we requested.
Moving on to 1999, we had the cube and the octahedron. I think you predicted something about squareness.
I'd written in '98 a prediction which is stupid and arrogant and hubristic, and I regret it. But I'd said that the following year, 99, would be to do with squares. And on the day I arrived, 23rd of July, I think, nearest my house was a formation which contained a quintuplet, which is the earliest formation we've had, which contains a right angle geometry and a square. And I was astonished by that. It was right there by my cottage. But I then discovered that on the same day, two other things arrived. Number one, the Allington cube, which had taken the square and thrown it into 3D, and the West Overton flattened octahedron, which posed the diagram of 8 equilateral triangles, which could be cut out like a kid's toy and folded to make the octahedron, which is the sibling of the cube, but is very much to do with squares. So again, I find it perplexing, but it's happened so often that I suppose I would now be perplexed if it did not happen. I stared at it in my living room thinking, what is it? Then Karen, go back. was also staring at the same formation in her living room. One Saturday morning, she called me up and she said, we'd both been in our separate rooms thinking, this is so beautiful, but it is trying to be articulate, but we don't understand it. And Karen said, perhaps these are the 3 dots of an ellipsis, dot, 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 which at the end of a sentence means something's coming. And at the end of a number chain means an infinite number. She said, if that is an ellipsis, maybe that is a decimal point. Next slide. And this just opened it up for me. It was a 10-fold concentric formation. There were 10 rings at the level of stones thrown into a pond, and there were 10 slices at the level of cutting a pizza. And when she told me this about ellipsis and decimal point, I suddenly realized that this was number. So the path was swept out from the center circle. If you go out to the first ring and go round, it takes 3 slices of pizza, and there's the decimal point. So 3 point, go out, next slice of pizza, 1. Suddenly I realized it was telegraphing precisely the number of pi, the constant which reconciles circularity with squareness. I was thrilled with this. I was fizzing. Next slide. Gary, who is over there asleep in the corner, I visited this formation from the top of the hill, looked down, it was beautiful. I mean, it was barley, and you could see, barley is, when there's a light breeze, you know, I mean, if the shampoo advertisers could achieve that effect, they'd be worth millions, you know. And I'd been up to the top and looked down on it, and I was thrilled with this formation, and also thrilled with the discovery of pi. And Gary phoned me from the field, bless him, bless you. And he said, I can get you into formation. I said, I'm not going into any formation to destroy the crop with my wheelchair. He said, no, there's a bridle path. And I thought, that's odd. One thing we know about the circle makers is the field is used as a frame. They are very artistic in their positioning. And when they overlay a boundary, which is very rare, it has a real meaning. They're able to position the formation to a centimeter. So the fact that this was over the bridle path, it was great for me because I could go in. This was the last formation I went in. I'll be forever grateful. But the following week, there was another revelation. Bert Janssen, who some of you might know, did some work on it, and he found that that path marked one side of a square which precisely squared the circle. Now that means that they have the technology to manipulate the formation to centimeters to achieve the accuracy. That was the last time I was in a formation, in 2008.
It's strange because we talked earlier about things that come to you and where do they come from and where do ideas come from. But the first thing that came in my mind when I went to that formation, which to my mind is the Michael Glickman formation, because you cracked the pie thing with some help and some other people helping you with an idea of where to look. And it also contained the square of the circle. But the first thing that came to my mind when I saw that path was Michael can go into a crop circle.
It almost brings me to tears. It was wonderful. And the crop circles are well known not only for their inherent quality and art, but for their framing. They always have great respect for the field, the boundaries of the field, the events in the field, and the idea of a formation being smacked over a pre-existing landscape feature is so unusual, almost unprecedented. That when one realizes, number one, it's a way in for wheelchair users, and number two, that it forms with precision the line of one side of the square which squares the circle of that formation. You realize just how comprehensive is the intelligence of the crop circle contractors.
The will and intent, and also then the curriculum and the tick from teacher, it's all encompassed in there with your work in mind. I felt with that formation, it was teacher saying, here you go Michael, not only is this one for you, but you can come back into a crop circle after all these years. And
yes.
Who think, as you've said many times, most people are focused on who makes these things, but very people ask the question, what about the mind it comes out of? And a mind that takes that wider context within the framing of the field.
It's so generous.
It's so loving.
Yeah. Totally generous and considerate. It was a confirmation. If ever we needed a confirmation, that was it. I did a workshop on June the 15th, a geometry workshop. And I have to say, it's something I've done often. I've done it with Karen often. And I hope to do it with Karen several times over the next 200 years. And the way I form it is based fundamentally on the Vesica Pisces. The Vesica Pisces is the prime act of sacred geometry. How do you define unity? And the problem is dividing the circle. And this is card number 2. Card 1 is a simple circle. Card 2 is the circle with its sister drawn with the point on the perimeter. But that shape, that double circle with the crescent on the left, the crescent on the right, and this important almond shape in the middle, proliferates into the triangle, the square, the pentagon, the pentagram, the hexagon, the hexagram, the heptagon, the heptagram. It really is a seed of creation. The season has been rotten this year. By June the 15th, I was depressed. And I woke the morning of this workshop and I said, I hope we get a formation today to commemorate this meeting. We had the meeting, and at the meeting I said what I normally say to a workshop, that whether they know it or not, they are now being scanned and noted by the crop circle authorities, and they're now fully paid up card-carrying croppies, and that is something it's like the Hotel California. You can get out anytime you can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. And that was that. And I went home and I thought, wow, that was a very nice workshop. Next slide. This is card 7, showing one of the steps towards the complexity that arrives from the simple thing. 2 days later, I found that on the morning of June the 15th, Saturday, which was the morning of our workshop, that arrived in Sicily. There's another story there. But number one, it arrived 1 hour away from the hotel I go to every year after the crop circle season in Sicily. Number two, and this really goes into John Martino time and synchronicity territory, this formation was down on the ground before we started the workshop.
In the last part of your lecture, you talked about something that happened quite recently when you gave a workshop.
Yeah, and the season start was shitty, you know. Nothing. The winter had blighted a lot of crops, and we're very short formation. And I'd long arranged this geometry workshop for 15th of June. I got up and I wished for a formation. I said, God, it would be nice. Here we are, Saturday, 15th of June. It would be very nice if this day, this meeting, this workshop had the confirmation of a formation. It was not to be. But a couple of days later, I found that on the very morning of the 15th, when we were doing a workshop there was already a Vesica Pisces diagram, the most specific and unquestionable Vesica diagram, placed in a field in Sicily. And 2 points. Number one, the geometry workshop that I did and I've been doing for years, and hope
to be doing for another couple of 100 years is based on the Vesica-Pisces diagram, number one. Number two, the formation came down in Sicily, in Enna, which is 1 hour from the hotel I stay in every year after the crop circle season. Coincidence.
Just another one of those coincidences.
Yeah. And the really odd thing, which turns the brain to scrambled egg again, is that realistically the formation was in place some hours before I worked on the diagram. They knew it was coming.
So here we are now, it's the end of the season and we're sitting outside basking in the glorious sunshine. The tractors have been driving by, bringing in all the straw because the fields are all being pretty much harvested now. But we've had an unprecedented year this year with regards to the farmers' attitude toward formation, against which formations have continued to come down in fields which it's widely known that the farmers will cut them out immediately, and they've still come down anyway. How do you see the future panning out with this, Michael?
Well, I have to give you my most useful answer. I don't know. I have no idea, but there are volumes to be learned from this year. There's a great deal to be taken away and digested. And the crop circle phenomenon is, above all, a curriculum. And I thrash around to find what is to be taken away and digested from the events of this season, and it's not pleasant. What I have learned really is how badly, thoughtlessly, inconsiderately people behave. We are offered what I can only now call the miraculous. We who are involved with this, I feel, are enormously privileged, truly blessed to be close to this unprecedented range of manifestation. And one would hope that people, on approaching this, could be opened, softened, made more generous, made more loving, made more patient, made more reasonable. And again, it breaks my heart because the reality is they're not softened, they're hardened. Their eyes not open, they're closed. They're less considerate, they're less compassionate, and what I can do is say, well, that is what we, humanity, have to confront and go through now, and bless us all. and I wish everybody strength and happiness and everything, but I believe I'm shocked by how badly we behave in the face of this. So I don't know what will happen. I do know that I feel an enormous weight of responsibility, although I don't know why or how. I don't know what needs to be done, but I do feel an enormous crushing weight of responsibility for the nastiness of this year. Yeah. What a sad way to end this interview. I am underneath this, or above this, irrationally optimistic. I think it will continue, and I think we will get another lesson, another lecture, and maybe we will have learned something by next year. I don't hold my breath, but I hope.
It's all encompassing, isn't it, Michael? The darkness and the light, it's all contained within taking a look at this phenomenon.
Yeah.
Michael Glickman, thank you very much.
Gary King, thank you very much.